And my name's Maggie Patton, and I work at the State Library of New South Wales. And I'm speaking from Gadigal land, the first peoples and custodians of the land on which the library stands, and whose skies and waters are surrounding the library. We offer our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome today to our special In Conversation with Donald Kerr. Just to remind you, you will be able to ask questions, so add them in the chat, and towards the end we'll stop talking. If we stop talking, we must remember, Donald, that we can't be here too long because you need to have your dinner.
That's all right.
We did chat for a while the other night in preparation. So type your questions into the chat, and then I can ask them a little bit later on for Donald when we get to that point. So Donald Kerr worked for 32 years with heritage materials in New Zealand. I'm going to read from the bio here. The Sir George Grey Special Collections, Auckland City, and latterly the Special Collections at the University of Otago. During that time, he curated some 120 exhibitions and has had a number of books and articles published that focus on portions of these particular collections. He's now retired, we'll get to that later on, and continues to work on book projects. He's also Centre for the Book, co-director of Centre for the Book at the University of Otago, which is something we might touch on at the end of the conversation as well. So I've got a few questions here, but I'm sure that we'll vary from them, Donald.
Yep.
So tell us about your early working career and what was the path to what you've said was your dream job with the Otago collections. Were you always going to be a librarian?
No, and it was by accident in some ways. Happy accident. I was teaching, taught for a number of years, left, went overseas, came back, and one year I took up a job in the planning department of the Auckland Regional Council, and their motto was planning is no planning. And so I ran courses for them, and it was a 2-year stint, and I could have stayed and made a lot of money, but I chose not to. The librarian at the Auckland Regional Council was named a woman called Marjorie Warwick. Marjorie said, "You've always got a book in you, you're always reading a book. Oh, have you ever thought about going to librarianship?" So she sort of said, put that in my head. I applied, went to Victoria University, did the 1-year academic career, the postgrad diploma, as it was then called. And leaving that, I got a job at Auckland University. I was in the reference department doing, checking abstracts and all that sort of stuff. And the job down the road at the public library, the Auckland Public Library, rare books collection job came up, and it was a maternity leave. My colleague was leaving, Eleanor. She was going to have her first child, and I thought, well, better 1 year in rare books than nothing at all.
Oh,
and
wow.
18 years later, I was in that job, and I stayed there forever and a day, and learnt on the job. At library school, there was a book of the history of the book, not that much about rare books, manuscripts, and how to handle things, let alone exhibitions. So I learnt those sorts of things on the job at the Grey Collection in Auckland. And that's how I started. And when I finished my work on Sir George Grey as a collector, my PhD, the job at Otago came up. I said to my wife, I'd like to go to Dunedin. She said, over my dead body. It's cold, it's, whatever. And so we came down and loved it. And it was the Grey Collection and the job at Otago, my two best jobs. My other job was washing dishes in a restaurant in Versailles.
The restaurant in Versailles. And so, let's go back to Versailles. So what did you do in Versailles?
I was a dishwasher.
So how did you get that job? That sounds like a great job.
I rang up the boss, and he didn't understand me, and I didn't understand him. In fact, I went to a job agency place, and they said, look, there's a job packing socks along the road. I said, oh, that sounds like me. So I went to go and get the job packing socks, and it had been taken. And I went back to the guy and I said, what else? And he said, there's this job at a restaurant in Palais d'Or, which was the first big sort of shopping complex in France, just outside Versailles. And I said, well, that's what I've got to do. So I went and washed dishes. I had a guy from Mozambique. He was Patrick. He was 17 years old. The only word that he had of English was disco. And so we used to try and communicate whilst cleaning the forks and the knives.
Okay, all right. So now when you started to work at Auckland Library,
Yes.
how did you feel when you first met the first folio? Because they have a first folio there, don't they?
But yes, I've got first, second, third, and fourth. I've got 4 folios. So that's one of the treasures, I suppose, that I've always regarded as fondly being able to work with. It's pretty amazing. And of course, they have a Pericles quarto as well as a 1640 poem. So they've got quite a little clutch of Shakespeare materials. And of course, I did an exhibition on that, and I really enjoyed that exhibition. And for listeners, I have done a lot of exhibitions, and we were quarterly, 4 a year. So I was given about 8 weeks, 9 weeks to get an exhibition up and running.
Yeah.
So
a lot of exhibitions.
Sorry?
A lot of different exhibitions on lots of different subjects too.
No repeats except medieval manuscripts and book plates.
Yeah.
So
when you got the job at Otago, you said it was a dream job.
Yep.
Why did you think? What was it about it that was a dream?
Well, I think it was a sense of discovery, because in many ways I was the first special collections librarian appointed there, and they had some excellent people before me, but I was the first, and so it was an opportunity to they had an exhibition program for a year, but also to come to grips with what was actually in the collection. The Grey was a public library system, and the Grey was there since the 1880s. A lot of people knew about the medieval manuscripts and the Blakes and the folios, and so a lot of the Maori language materials, a lot of, and all the other collections that came along after Grey. So there was a lot known about public library system. It's a wonderful, wonderful collection of material. The Otago stuff was. There was a sense of discovery, I think, Maggie, that I had, discovering the John Locke materials that they have, the John Evelyn and his garden history stuff, the Schultz collection of the ecclesiastical materials.
So if you started there and you were the first person to work with special collections, you're sort of learning on the job.
Yes.
So was there a particular way, did you just dive into those collections and open covers and look at them?
Yes.
Or was there a reference tool, or was there something that made you think, oh, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see if we hold these in the collections? Because quite often I think when you start off with a collection, you don't really know what it is.
Yes.
You can just dive into it, or you could, in here we could look at a sort of a copy of Ferguson's bibliography and have a look and see what's in the collection, or you could have a look at an important reference tool and say, let's see what landmark books of the 16th century we have in the library. Yep. Do you think that there's a strategy to getting to know a special collection, or do you think it is a combination of just diving into it as well?
I think there is that, perusing the stack and walking around and looking at stuff. I think, to be honest, the exhibition stuff, the exhibition programs that one has in an institution is very good. I mean, for a year, and you're looking at Luther or France or some subject that's been picked up on, and you have to go and physically examine collections to see what you can obtain for show. And you might start off with 120 books and chisel it down to about 60. But over that time, you've actually come to grips with, well, gosh, we've got this, we haven't got that. But I must say, one of the strategies you've just reminded me, Maggie, is that I used to get antiquarian catalogues from dealers all around the world. I'd, write to them and say, please send me catalogues, and they would do that. And I would use those catalogues as a guide to what we had and what we didn't have. So I'd go, over a period of time,
yeah.
couple of hours a day, going from beginning to the end of the catalogue and finding out, jeepers, this thing's in storage. It's out on the open shelf. It needs to be transferred. Or, gee, gosh, we've got that, and it's worth. That's what they're asking for it. And so you get, and these things catalogue, as you know, these catalogues come in various shapes and sizes, and they've got themes, and and it's that's another fun way, really, of actually.
You're right. That's very good looking at catalogues, isn't it? I'd say that.
It is, and it gets you to know also the jargon of the antiquarian dealers and who's the best and the worst. Well, not the worst, but I mean priciest, all the rest of it.
So did you acquire material as well? Did you have much of a budget, or did you really just have to work?
Yes, we did. Well, in Auckland, there was always a problem because it was a city council, and they were always looking at roads and other such things, and the library,
hospitals and the schools.
Libraries were, budget was often very constraining. Whereas at the Otago, I had much more of a budget. There was a greater sense of learning, like we're an academic institution. So I'm not saying there weren't problems, because really the amount that we were given each year isn't really that much when you equate it with pounds and American dollars and minuscule in comparison to maybe your state libraries or some of the institutions overseas. And the other thing is we don't have tax write-offs. So we are New Zealand is reliant on a good old-fashioned benefactor.
Okay.
Person who comes in and wants to give their collection to an institution. We don't have that. We don't have that tax write-off business that Canada and the States has, where they can give stuff to a library, an institution.
And did you have to work a lot with those benefactors? Do you think that was a particular aspect of that job that was important?
Yes, I think one is always having to cultivate the collector. And they're out there, and as they get older, they're always increasingly wondering what they're going to do with their materials, their collection. My personal collection, they're willed to Otago University. My four collecting areas that I beaver into, but they may decide not to take it. And that becomes my issue. But it's.
Do you think that's changed a little bit? We were talking this morning about collecting, formed collections, and how sometimes donors want you to take the whole thing, or that sort of thing.
I think between you and me, the institutions.
Hold on, there's a whole lot of other people listening.
Yeah, I know, but I think a lot of institutions don't like the word collections anymore. It's hard to get named collections, duplications. It's one of those struggles I think that somebody working in the heritage area has to worry about. These materials, be they archives, photographs, books, whatever, come across to you somehow by chance or whatever, and you want to keep them in an area or keep them together, and you've got to fight the fight to get that done. And sometimes it's hard when you've got managers above you, business got a business model, and they say, no, we don't want this space. It's cost of cataloguing.
Yeah, it's tricky. What about working with the academics? I suppose that's something that is a bit different about a special collections like those at Otago. Did much work with the academics?
Yes, and that was fun. That was fun because you end up getting to know the strengths of your collection, and we had a strong philosophy in the religious section. We had the Brash collection, which is a strong modern collection of poetry and such like. And so you can go to individuals and find out by the the handbook that comes out, or just by knowing people and saying, well, look, what are you doing this year? Here's this particular collection that may be of interest to you. In fact, just about 6 weeks ago, I met an academic who teaches Greek, ancient Greek, and in the classics department. I'd never met her before, but I wrote to her the next day after meeting at a restaurant, and we had a chuckle and this, that, and the other. And I told her about particular collections at Otago, and I said, look, here's a number of books, and I even pasted a few samples of Greek titles and said, look, it may not suit now, but these things are here. Please go and see them, even though I'm not there anymore.
Yeah. I think we were talking about this the other day, weren't we, really, that when you're looking after a special collections or any of these sorts of significant collections, you're never off duty, are you? You're often thinking about promoting and what you're doing. Do you think that you'll ever stop thinking about promoting the Otago collection?
No, and I don't stop doing the Grey and any others, really. We've got a centre for you mentioned Centre for the Book. We've got a symposium coming. We have an annual symposium, and the symposium this year is Books in the Pacific. And so I've gone back to Sir George Grey and his collection of the Pacific language materials that he amassed, both while he was in Cape Town, while he was in Australia, and while he was in New Zealand. So, and I'm, actively saying, well, look, these things are there. Please go and use them.
Do you think things have changed? How do you think working with libraries and collections has changed since you first started? I had someone the other day ask me what it was like before you had a computer on your desk. And I was thinking, well, you had a pen, you had a phone. So what do you think's changed over the years that you've
I think I told you that little anecdote about I had an old Olivetti typewriter when I first started in the Grey. This is 1988.
Yeah. And
in fact, I didn't get to my first day on the day I started, they had the fire. 8th of the 8th, 88. There was a fire in the internal shell of the library. So I turned up all bushy-tailed, ready to attack the collection, and had to go home at 11 o'clock on the bus. It was I was rather annoyed, really. But
collection okay?
Yeah, it was just an internal wiring or something that happened, and everyone just had to go home. So I went home with the library manager and the cataloguer, and that was my first day. But I didn't have much. I had a little, as I say, Olivetti typewriter, and I wrote out on the Olivetti typewriter, which had very poor E's and T's and etc. And I wrote a little proposal about getting an electric typewriter for special collections, and I think they must have been impressed by the dodgy letter that I wrote, because I got the electric typewriter. And having to write captions out on this big machine that had clunky fonts, and of course there was no way of erasing an error, so I had to be twinked out or using another piece of paper. And it's all, and laying out the books. I mean, we've moved on so much. I mean, cradles and preservation and light, measuring light and all the rest of it. But sadly, not sadly, but what it was back then was you just lay a book out on the cabinet, lock it, and hope that it's okay.
But you now provide online access to all of your exhibitions, so that must have been at the time
that was
a big change. That was
yes, fantastic. And that was Otago did that, and I was I mostly worked by myself. I've had an assistant at the end of my tenure at Otago, but to rally around the IT people and the reprographics team to come and actually photograph the items that were on display, and then to meld in the captions into a sort of an online exhibition, being able to use, because the physical ends, and it often happened, there was a lag of about 2 months, 3 months sometimes, where the physical will end, but I'd be able to get the link of the electronic version and use that as a way of promoting, hey, look, it's just up, it's gone physically, but it's alive as an e-version, and those things are still up now, and people can use them as resources. They're free to everybody. I mean, it's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of actually promoting materials that are stuck at the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are some of the really important or significant things that you think you achieved or that you remember the most about that period? What do you think are your great achievements, do you think? Is there a particular highlight or highlights?
I think I remember the Grey fondly because it was a democratic, I mean, we had young kids, 5 or 6 years old, coming into the class, into school groups would come in, and you'd show them the smallest book and a facsimile of the Audubon and, all that sort of stuff. And thinking that those kids are future readers and enjoyers of libraries. And I did learn so much from that Grey and Henry Shaw and Frank Reed and his Dumas collection and the whole that wonderful. And I ended up working in a team. We had me initially, but then they formed a special collections team. So I had colleagues that we could share responsibilities. And I think the format that they had then, I think, was very successful. They had a maps librarian, a manuscripts, rare books, photographs, and ephemera.
Oh, we're certainly talking about the past now.
Yeah, and those formats, all getting special treatment by a dedicated librarian looking at maps or looking at the archive, the manuscript materials. And we all worked as a team at the end, and we shared exhibitions and shared ideas. And that was, I think, very successful for the Grey. My Otago experience, I've got to say, I wouldn't have been able to be introduced to University Press. They published a number of my books on collections. The e-versions of the exhibitions, I think, are great things. It's astounding to me that they're still out there. The links are okay, and people can look at the materials that we showed off since 2002.
And so, what about the characters, the books and things? Are there particular books that you found really interesting, or particular things that you always go to when you need to talk to someone? What are those things that you use?
Well, the Grey, you've mentioned the folios. There was the Tapa cloth book in the Grey collection. It was a Kennedine, John Kennedine. It's a Tapa cloth. It's one of 68 because of that book, and the fact that Dr. Hocken used to have a copy, but it's now gone, was an initiative for me to actually start a census. So I looked at that Alexander Shaw's Tapa cloth book, and they always talked about 35 copies or 40 copies, but in fact there are 68 copies. And in that census that I produced, there's now locational certainty. So you can go to Scotland, or you can go to your place, Maggie, or places in the States, and see ashore those Tapa cloth specimens collected by Cook and his men on the voyages.
So when you did that research, so, people are often funded for that. Did you do that as part of your work, or was it sort of an independent project? Did you travel under your own finances, or because that was a big achievement?
Yeah. Did it as part of the job. And if I traveled to Hawaii as I did, and I kicked myself because I remember being in Bishop's Museum. I always travel to libraries. Don't forget, folks, they are great places. I wasn't on the Tapa cloth kick then when I went to the Bishop's House Museum, and they've got 3 copies there. And the librarian is so short-staffed. She hasn't had the opportunity to tease out the details, so I was reliant on her, very skimpy. Love to go back and have a look at those. So it was all done, it's just, part and parcel of what you try and do, in the sense of pushing stuff out. I've got to say, the other one in the public library and Grey collection was the Lewins Birds of Australia.
Ah, yes, a favourite.
Which, you know, and it was the 13th copy, unrecorded.
Yeah.
And a certain dealer from Melbourne, when he heard that, came scuttling across from Melbourne, and he said, "Your copy is the tallest and the cleanest."
Oh, come on. Has he seen all of ours?
I've seen all yours. Yes, don't worry. But that Lewins Birds of Australia, the original Howe printing, and the wonderful birds, the three-toed kingfisher, or yes, kingfisher. Yes. So those are some from the Auckland collection. The one that I have, my favourite at the Otago, is a 1481 Vulgate Bible printed in Venice, and it's a Rood and Hunt binding, and according to experts, there are only 26 examples in the world. So this is one of 26. And it's got this, and it was produced by Rood and Hunt, who were Oxford binders operating about 1480s.
Oh, wow, that is really early.
Yeah. And what also is about this, apart from the typographic, the layout of the text, you know, the text in the middle of the sheet and the footnotes around the outside, is the fact that it's got 6 indulgent fragments.
Really?
Tipped in as sort of sewing guards in the book, and they were printed by Caxton.
Ah, what a package.
And that was, I didn't discover these things. Christopher Hamill, the medieval manuscripts expert, who of course had been looking at the manuscripts throughout New Zealand, and as he was doing the manuscripts, he came across all the impugnables that we have at Otago, and this 1481 revealed these indulgent fragments, and so there's Caxton fragment, and they were printed about 1482, 1480. So there's this Venetian printing book that was printed in Venice, somehow gets to Oxford and bound there, but also has fragments from Caxton, who was operating in Westminster. Yeah,
that's fascinating. And then it makes its way out to New Zealand.
And then it's in the Schultz collection and just sits there.
And do you know how he acquired it?
I've got no idea, Maggie. Nothing. Provenance is gone. But that's probably my favourite book in the collection. Although the Nuremberg Chronicle, 1993, is pretty special too.
Yeah. That's always a great.
These
great
things
story around the Nuremberg Chronicle. Yeah.
And these things, you come across and you think, I'm fortunate to deal with these materials. And it could be there's the missal, the medieval missal in the Grey collection, 2 volumes. I mean, that one, Besançon, in France, it was produced. Wonderful.
A few years ago, I remember, I don't know, you start new staff on tours, and then a couple of years later someone will say to you, I will never forget that day you showed me the Nuremberg Chronicle.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And I think what's also very important is that it's probably me rather, I'm trying to, I suppose, treat people special, so if they do come in, and I was fortunate to have an office by the exhibition areas in both jobs, so that I could see who was looking at the exhibitions, but also you get to know them if they're regulars. And they always poke their heads in, and so you're stuck there for 4,000 words. You can't get out, you can't escape, but you've got to deal with that. But by treating them well or special, or saying, "Oh, have you seen this?" or "Have you seen that?" I think they remember those sorts of things, those experiences. I think I would as a reader or as a user.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So, a couple of books that you particularly like. What about when you're travelling overseas? Are there particular libraries or collections that you think are really worth a visit or that you'll return to?
Well, I think they're all worth a visit. I'd come back to your place any day.
When
In
you
Victoria.
come at Christmas.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I just go. I love going to them all, really, and I particularly like using, if I can use something, rather than just go in and be a visitor. I'd like to. I try and work through the system, and I know libraries are overpowering things. You walk through there and you're sort of dizzy. Where do I start? And going to the British Library and ordering up stuff.
Yeah.
Or Bodleian Library, or
I think you said, was it the Bodleian Library where they let you in to stack? What was that?
That's right. Yes, I shall tell. The Bodleian, many years ago, I was working on Sir George Grey as a collector, and I tracked down some antiquarian dealer catalogues. The Bodleian had these things, and I sat at the Bodleian in the room and ordered these catalogues up, and I'd only look at them for about a small amount of time, short amount of time, because they weren't really proving useful. And I went up to the librarian. I said, this has got to change. Can I sit in situ where these catalogues are? And she said yes. And I thought, this is great. So she dragged me downstairs to where all the Mags and Sotheby's and all the catalogues that I was looking at for Grey, 1850s sort of thing. And she gave me a little 19th century seat and a 19th century table over a little bare light. And she said, look, as long as you come out at 4:30, we'll be fine. And so—
What trust? What trust?
Oh, I tell you, and when I got sick and tired of looking at catalogues, I go and have a little peruse along the shelves of other things. But it made eminent sense, really. And I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
I really just did. It was so fantastic. I've got to tell you about another one. That used to be a chap who used to come and visit at the Grey collection, and I got to know him. He was a knight, and he had his own private library in Vancouver. Vancouver, because it was a distance away from everywhere,
Yeah.
just a flight to places that he had to go to for auction. It was a private library run by this family. All the kids collected, except they all collected around the Pacific Rim. That was their collecting field. And Sir John was interested in the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. So he would come here with his wife, and they'd take up a suite at the Regent Hotel in Auckland and stay there for 3 months. And he'd come in every other day and give me books. I told him, I'd say, one day, I'm in 2 months' time, I'm coming to Vancouver. And he says, oh, do you need any money, Don? And like an idiot, I said, no, it's okay, Sir John, I'll get there myself. So anyhow, I got there to Vancouver, and I gave him a call, and I said, Sir John, I'm in town. I'd love to come and see your private library. Can you tell me which bus to catch? And maybe I can catch you about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. No. I'll send Kevin around for you. So Kevin was a chauffeur, and so he chauffeured me backwards and forwards to the library for the 3 days that I was in looking at Sir John's library. And it was and I walked in there, and he had a librarian, and I felt like stabbing her and taking her job. But and she said, I'm trying to organize the collection, but Sir John keeps on moving things around. So like it was, and he had this Audubon, a real Audubon that he had paid $3.1 million for. And it was a gift to his son, his older son, who lived in the castle in Ireland. One of the other sons lived next to Sotheby's in California. The daughter was the only one who didn't collect outside the Pacific. She collected medieval manuscript.
Wow, what a family.
And she was outside the Pacific Rim. And I said to Sir John, how many medieval manuscripts have you got? And of course, he had these filing cabinets, and he just pulled them out. And he says, we don't count them. We don't count them.
We don't count them.
We don't count them. But the most interesting aspect of that collection was that he had manuscripts written by Pizarro and Cortez, South American, the conquistadors, and they had translated those things into English. And what they would do is that they'd hire in a scholar, and they'd bring the scholar in to work on those materials and make it publicly accessible. So it was not only a family library, but it was a working library in the sense that they pushed books out, publications based on the collection.
Now, look, someone in the audience wants to know what Sir John's last name is, so she can look him up.
Am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to say it?
Yeah.
All right, Galvin, Sir John Galvin.
Sir John Galvin.
Galvin.
VIN. Oh, okay. All right. That's interesting. So
and he was about 85 when I met him, and he's probably gone now, but I'm sure that the family still have that.
Still have their collections.
Yeah, and it was in West Pender, right in the middle of town, about the 12th floor. I think they owned the building.
Yeah,
I never asked that sort of question. I just it was an extraordinary private library.
An amazing experience. So what advice would you give to librarians, archivists starting in these careers? What are the things that you didn't know when you started that you've realised as you went along, or would you suggest as advice? I don't know. What do you think? Anything?
Role-wise?
Yeah, role-wise or skill.
Well, I think if anyone gets the opportunity to do exhibitions, I would take that on like a shot, because that's one way in which anyone's going to get grips with what you've got, the holdings, or what you don't have. And then you can go and buy books, supplement. You could. I think exhibitions. I would hardly, depending on, because I've worked in an academic situation as well as a public library system. One thing I lack, and it's my fault, no one else's, I don't have languages.
Yes, that's a good point. Yep.
And I've just finished this book on Reverend Schultz, who was a collector, and his collection is in Otago. It's strongly Hebrew, Latin, Greek. There's lots of. It's a very complex world that I've had to battle. If you have languages, I would cultivate the language business. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Very helpful. I have to think about that question too, Maggie, but to take on. Yeah. Okay. I think one has to be approachable. That's quite, I think you could sit in special collections or a heritage collection role and not do anything. It could be just a static operation whereby you'll just, maybe one or two people come in every now and again. I think you have to be very self-motivating and initiate projects. It's a very selfish thing because I learn from it. Yes. And by me learning about a particular theme, or like Blake holdings in the collection, or what sort of Pacifica materials you've got, or Aboriginal materials, you can then do something with that. I'm a fan of inventories, making hard copy inventories of themes and subjects that we've got, books by William Blake or incunables, and all the rest of it. And that is very helpful to people who come in and say, what Bibles have you got? Yeah. No, I think that whole idea of being proactive and not sitting and waiting for things to happen
and making
Yeah.
that happen is important. Yeah.
I,
So that's a little. You've had a lot to do with sort of the centre of the book and that sort of thing, and conferences and things. And I think that's part of it, isn't it? You've never sort of sat back.
I like somehow I can't say no, but that's sometimes sometimes I do, but it's
But it's about getting the collection out, isn't it? It's about
well,
no point having a collection without being used.
Yes, and it's also networking too. And I love going up and down the country or going overseas and meeting librarians in various roles.
Yes.
And talking to them, bookshops, and you develop a relationship with these people. And I think that's a very healthy thing. Somebody, and you also know about collections, and like in Dunedin,
yes,
somebody would come up and say, "Here's a Bible, or here's a book, here's a Robbie Burns volume of Robbie Burns," and I'd say, "Well, no, this is fantastic, but take it to the public library, to the Rare Books librarian there, because they have a strength in Bibles. They have the Robbie Burns collection. If someone says, here's a Milton, I'd say, go to Turnbull, where the Milton collection is in Turnbull."
Yeah, it's very important to sort of do that networking.
And I guess that's the importance of actually belonging to something like the Bibliographic Society, going to conferences, and mixing and matching with people who are maybe outside your field, but still very interesting.
No, I think they're all good points. Hey, someone's asked, what's worst behaviour you've ever seen in the reading room?
Oh.
Worst reading behaviour you have seen with visitors handling rare books? That's the question.
Oh. I can't really remember. I know this is outside, this is in the public library. This is shocking. Close your ears if you don't want to hear all this, but I was sometimes called upon to do late nights in the public library, and it was quite good because it stopped me from being disembodied, and that's something you've got to watch too. Is you're also part of a team.
Yes.
Of others playing around, and if you don't, you've got to cultivate everybody within the system to try and dolly the things along. And I used to go down and work in the literature arts department, and one night, and I was the only guy on the block. All the rest were female. My colleagues were females, and there was some guy peering through these shelves, and he was looking dodgy. And someone said, "Go and track him." And so I tried to track him, and I lost him. And I went down to the first floor, or the ground floor, where the British Museum catalogues used to be. And I was the only one who used to use the old British Museum catalogues. Yeah. And I went down there, and in between these British Museum catalogue shelves, this guy was lying on the carpet, his trousers down, masturbating.
And did you approach him?
I kicked the shit out of his feet.
And he got up and left?
Got up and left.
It's something about those museum catalogues.
I know.
Incredibly interesting.
But as to a reader in the collections, they go through the protocols of signing, and most people are pretty genuine about, if they're not students, they bring in a license or some passport and they sign their lives away, and it's all part of that procedure. And I think that's a fantastic thing. Yeah. So most people, I probably, in the 32 years, I don't think of, well, there's only one incident where I thought I should have been quiet. I said to one woman up in Auckland, "How was your weekend?" And she said, "That was fantastic." She was American. She was a bit, I'm not against Americans. She had sort of strange punky hair, and I said, "How was your weekend?" And she said, "It was fantastic." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I went to Venus." I said, "Oh, really?" And then I asked this next stupid question of, "What did you do there?" And she said that she went back there to Venus to find out the history of her current boyfriend, who was a 17-year-old Venezuelan lambada dancer.
And then you were busy, you had to
And
check.
then I thought, fine, I'm
Yeah.
walking away from this.
Good decision, good decision.
I mean, sometimes it doesn't pay to be too friendly.
No,
I don't know. But I mean,
now, yeah. Now, look, just let me say, has anyone got any questions I can ask Donald? I've got a couple of other things I'm going to ask him, but if you've got something you're burning to know, please type it into the chat. Special collections librarians don't retire, don't they? But they don't really retire. What are you working on now?
me, I've just finished a book on the Schultz collection, which I've just mentioned about Canon Schultz, the Reverend William Schultz. It's a Sleeping Beauty library. It's been sitting in Otago since 1893.
Yeah.
It's 5,600 books and manuscripts, medieval manuscripts, early printed. And it's that book that I was telling you, which was my favorite, the 1481 Vulgate Bible, that volume. It's from that collection. And there's very little known about Schultz. And I had the opportunity to go back, got an award to go back to St. John's College in England, was educated and looked at parish records, worked in 4 ritualistic parishes in London. And so there's no documentation about why I collect or I love books or invoices or anything. So it's a study, it's a reconstruction through the library. I have physically examined, and I do it with all the books that I have written about these collectors. I physically examine their collections. I did it twice for the Schultz collection, maybe some items more, but physically examining, and 5,600 items.
Sometimes with collectors, they keep the records of their acquisitions and their correspondence.
They do, and that's
a collection like that.
Well, the Grey collection is dealers, etc. And so when I did my PhD, which became a book, that was great because there was some documentation, and there are lots of collectors out there who are very meticulous about where they got their materials from, and whether they read them or not. Frank Reed, the Dumas collector, whom I'm a great fan of, he penciled at the front of the book when he started reading it, and he penciled the date that he finished it. So you've actually got to
that he read it.
Track his reading as well. So he's not only quite good about where he gets his books from, but you can actually track a history of reading for a period as well.
That's fascinating.
And so
that's tricky. It's good because Mitchell we have really little at all about Mitchell's bought anything. But actually Dixon's different.
And so physically examining books is quite and I used to do it at lunchtime. I'd have a lunch and go down to the stacks and go through a couple of books.
Not with your lunch.
No, not with me. No. Always eating my lunch outside.
Okay. Now look, I've got another question here, Donald, from the crowd. 4 exhibitions a year is a lot in special collections. Did you have a team dedicated to exhibitions to help you?
No.
No.
Well, a team in the latter part of my time here at Otago, I had one assistant half-time, and the rest of the time it was me. And so you'd be doing everything from selecting, captioning, media, blurbs, you name it. And the best thing that I suppose advice for anyone going into librarianship in a course is to know a custodian and tea lady and the cleaners and all those people who are the core of an institution, who can get things done if you want things done. They'll move chairs for you for the opening, or they'll and I had to rely on that sort of the colleagues who'd come in and help me put up lettering on the wall, or at the latter stages, as I say, an assistant to go around and deliver posters, shops.
It's a lot of work. I've got another question. As an early career librarian, this conversation has me even more excited about my career and possibilities. So that's all. I've heard the advice on learning another language a few times. Is there a particular language you think would be most beneficial, or just a general understanding of multiple languages?
Well,
That's a hard one, isn't it?
yeah, it depends, of course, where if that person is in a particular institution that has books that are Latin or Greek or something. It depends on their fluency. I would say if you have the opportunity to learn some languages, take it. Please take it. I mean, I did my Arabic exhibition. Schultz collected Arabic Persian material. I was so enthused. And I looked at the stuff and I thought, this is beating me. I don't, what's going on here? Arabic script. And I talked to a lass who was going to give me free Arabic lessons. And I thought, wow. So I went and bought a book on Arabic, how to learn Arabic, and I got a few apps and all the rest of it. But Maggie, I ran out of time.
I know, it's hard, isn't it? Look, I know I did French at uni and I did German at school and Italian and it helps. I think sometimes, do you think maybe one of those European languages that has roots in other languages, I think helps?
I think so. I think very much so. I think it's something I think it's a valuable skill and a base of knowledge that.
And you wouldn't want to try and speak to anyone, but I think it's just the ability to read and to understand a little bit about the way the language works and some of the,
Well, doing a French language, we did an exhibition on France, and of course some of the, like the Voltaires that we display or something like that, you're forever reliant on English translations. And you could actually, you're looking at the original Voltaire piece or letter, Dumas, like I'm a great fan of Dumas. I did my master's thesis, Frank Reed and his Dumas collection. And I have missed so much because I don't have, even though I lived in France and I learned kitchen French,
doesn't. I know it's tricky. Now I've got one more question, then we need to finish up. I'm starting exploring my career options. Are most people mostly employed in special collections as archivists or librarians, or are there other common job titles?
Rare books librarian?
This is a longer question. You know what? I think Tara's answering this question. Next time we get together, I'm going to get back to you in a minute, Donald. Tara, next time ALIA Rare gets together in October, we're actually going to be talking to a group from ALIA who are talking about the Professional Pathways project and talking about pathways into the career, into the library and information sector. And where ALIA's Trish Hepworth and Phoebe Weston Evans are going to give us a bit of a presentation, and then it's going to be an opportunity to ask these sorts of questions and find out a little bit more about the career pathways. So join us on the 25th of October. Paige will be sending out a message about that. It's an interesting question, and I think that special collections are changing a lot. Job titles are changing a lot. And each time a library or an institution restructures, things move around a little bit. Yeah. Donald, just before we sign off, this has been really interesting and thank you very much. Just tell me, what books do you collect yourself?
I collect Henry Miller, the American writer of Tropical Cancer and Capricorn. The Powys brothers, John Llewellyn and Theodore.
Yeah.
Knut Hamsun, the Norwegian writer who won the Nobel Prize, mainly for The Growth of the Soil, which if you haven't read, you should read. And did I say Blaise Cendrars? Blaise Cendrars, the Swiss, but Blaise Cendrars is not his real name, but French poet who was the first person to go up to Henry in his atelier in France and say, you've written a fantastic book called Tropical Cancer. And the way I got to it, I told Maggie this the other day, was Miller wrote a book called Books in My Life.
Yeah.
And it's a passionate appreciation of all the books that Miller, who was a prolific reader, so a prolific letter writer, of all the books that he was influenced by or the ones that he wanted to read in the next 5 years. And I got that many, many years ago, and I used it as a checklist. I went back to the back of the book and I ticked off.
Like a good special collections librarian, you got a referencing and you then created a checklist. So that's
And
good.
that became my a little network, and so much so that I ended up corresponding with Henry Miller and trying to write and trying to see him before he was died, before he died in 1980. And I've had many. I still got connections around the world. The Miller.
Just from that collecting. So that's interesting.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Donald, for joining us this afternoon. It's been
Thank
really
you for asking me, Maggie.
and everyone will give you a virtual clap. And we know that we'll hear more from you, and perhaps you'll give a paper at a Bibliographic Society conference in the future.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, and please, if anyone wants to tease out anything on my email, Maggie can send out to people. I'm happy to talk to people. All right.
And Donald's sent out a few links that we're going to put send out to the list, which is a link to some of the exhibitions that he's done. So we'll share that with all of you in the ALIA Rare email list. And for those of you who may not have joined us before, there is an ALIA Rare email list. If you go onto the ALIA page and look in the particular groups for special and rare collections, you can see that. We also have a Twitter account, which you can follow and send messages. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future, please let us know. And don't forget that in the end of November, State Library of New South Wales hosting the Bibliographic Society Conference. And that is both in person and online, but it's very reasonable if you'd like to come on site, and a great opportunity to hear people speaking about these collections and network, just as Ronald has said, because you find out so much more. So Donald, thank you for joining us, and thanks everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for setting it up.
Good luck.
Good night.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.